In a quiet corner of a bustling American city, a girl no one noticed was about to change everything. Her name was Elena Grace, just 9 years old. Her mother worked nights cleaning a small community theater, and most evenings, Elena waited in the shadows, silent, unnoticed, humming softly while sweeping up the dust no one cared about. No one asked who she was. No one knew the storm that quietly brewed inside her. Until the day of the city's youth talent competition. She wasn't on the list. She hadn't rehearsed under spotlights. She wore an oversized sweater and scuffed sneakers. Her curls were messy, and her eyes carried a tired kind of hope. When she stepped onto the stage, the judges exchanged puzzled glances. Who was this child? A mistake? A last-minute filler? But then, she sat down at the piano. The moment her fingers touched the keys, the hall was swallowed by stillness. The music wasn't perfect, it was alive. It carried pain, wonder, loneliness, and something inexplicably pure. It didn't sound like a child. In the back row, hidden under a hood, sat Julian Rivers, once a celebrated pianist, now a recluse haunted by failure. He came only to feel something again. But as Elena played, his walls cracked. His hands trembled. His silence, 10 years long, was broken by a child who didn't even know she was saving someone. Each evening, as the last of the patrons filtered out into the night and the echoes of applause faded into silence, 9-year-old Elena Grace would slip through the side entrance of the city's majestic concert hall. The world inside felt like another universe, soaring ceilings painted with fading angels, velvet curtains drawn tight over stories centuries old, and the faint scent of dust mixed with old perfume. Elena moved like a shadow, careful not to draw attention. She knew the rules: children weren't allowed backstage, especially not the daughter of a cleaning woman. But this place was her sanctuary. While her mother worked long into the night, sweeping crumbs from beneath golden chairs and wiping fingerprints from gleaming stair rails, Elena would find her usual hiding spot, tucked behind the heavy curtain of the rehearsal room. From there, she would watch in stillness as the musicians rehearsed, their hands dancing across keys and strings, their faces lost in emotion. Sometimes it was the grand pianist, sometimes a lonely violinist practicing into the night. Elena watched everything. Listened to every note as if her life depended on it. And in a way, it did. Though no one had ever taught her to read music, she had begun to understand it in her own language, through feeling. Each swell of the cello was a wave in her chest. Each staccato note of the piano sent a spark through her spine. She didn't need sheet music, her soul was becoming a living, breathing score. But what made it all the more bittersweet was knowing that no one saw her. To them, she was just the janitor's kid. A smudge in the background. A pair of small shoes peeking from behind a curtain. Yet to Elena, every night in that hall was a step closer to something she couldn't name, a dream too fragile to speak aloud. One evening, as Elena sat silently in her usual hiding spot behind the heavy curtains of the concert hall, something unexpected stirred within her. The faint sound of piano keys drifted through the dimly lit room, like the whispers of a distant dream. It was Mia Hart, the renowned pianist, who had come to practice late at night. Elena had often watched Mia from afar, admiring her grace, her almost ethereal connection to the piano. But tonight, the music was different. Mia's fingers moved with such fervor, as if each note had a weight of its own, a depth that Elena could almost feel in her chest. There was a raw intensity in the melody, one that seemed to mirror Elena's own longing, as if Mia was playing from the deepest part of her soul. Elena leaned forward, heart pounding, her small body trembling slightly from the intensity of the music. The sound of the piano seemed to pierce the air, filling the empty hall with a haunting beauty. It was as though the notes spoke to Elena in a way words never could. She was no longer just a spectator to the music, she was submerged in it, wrapped in its tender embrace. For the first time, Elena felt that the music wasn't simply something to be admired from a distance. It was as if Mia, in her playing, was offering Elena a part of herself, a glimpse into her soul. And in return, Elena felt herself drawn in, her every breath syncing with the rhythm of the piano, as though the two were connected by an invisible thread. But then, Elena noticed something that made her heart tighten. As Mia's fingers danced across the keys, there was a subtle shift in her demeanor. For a split second, Elena saw her eyes flutter, the slightest shadow passing over her face. Mia, usually so composed, faltered. Her hands hesitated, as if unsure of the next note. Elena's pulse quickened. The perfection that Mia often embodied seemed to slip through her fingers like sand. The music that had flowed so effortlessly before now seemed strained, like a heart struggling to keep its beat. Mia stopped suddenly, her hands frozen above the keys. The silence that followed was thick with tension, a weight that pressed down on Elena's chest. She watched Mia closely, studying the way her shoulders sagged slightly, the way her hands trembled. There was a vulnerability there that Elena had never expected to see. Mia, the woman who could fill concert halls with music so powerful it brought tears to people's eyes, was struggling. Elena, feeling a deep surge of empathy, wanted to speak, to offer comfort, but she stayed still. She knew that sometimes, even the most beautiful music had to pause to gather itself. The thought made her heart ache in a way she hadn't anticipated. For the briefest moment, Elena wished she could step forward, take Mia's hands in her own, and say that it was okay, that she didn't need to be perfect, that she didn't have to carry the weight of her music alone. But the words caught in her throat, as she realized how much she herself needed to hear them. Elena, for all her quiet presence, was not yet ready to face her own fears. But as Mia began to play again, with more care this time, Elena felt a quiet connection form between them. It was as if the music had revealed a hidden part of Mia, and in that moment, Elena wasn't just a child hiding behind the curtains. She was a witness to something deeper, something fragile, human, and incredibly powerful. The days seemed to stretch endlessly for Elena as she found herself returning to the concert hall night after night. The music, so hauntingly beautiful, had woven itself into the fabric of her thoughts. But it wasn't just the melodies that called her back, it was Mia. Something about the way Mia played, the emotion she poured into every note, left Elena entranced. Each evening, Elena stood hidden behind the curtains, her breath shallow with anticipation. She watched Mia, her fingers dancing over the piano keys, each note a vivid reflection of a pain Elena could feel in her own chest. The way Mia played was almost like a conversation, one that Elena didn't fully understand, but couldn't walk away from. For the first time in her life, Elena felt like a silent observer of something deeper than music. She had always been the one others leaned on, the one who kept her emotions in check and buried her own struggles. But Mia's music, it cracked open something inside of her, an aching desire to connect, to understand the other side of the wall that both women had built around their hearts. Elena began to notice subtle things about Mia. The way she held herself, the strain in her posture, the way she hesitated before she played certain pieces. There was a quiet strength in Mia, but also a fragility that Elena couldn't ignore. It was as though Mia was holding back something, a painful truth she couldn't let escape. Elena understood that. She recognized it because she had lived it herself, that suffocating weight of being expected to be perfect, to never show weakness. The perfection in Mia's music was a mask, one that concealed the turmoil bubbling beneath the surface. One evening, the music took on a different tone. Mia's hands were shaking as they touched the piano keys, her breath uneven. Elena felt it before she even understood what was happening. The song, which had once been fluid and controlled, now stumbled, jagged, as if Mia herself had lost her grip on the melody. The notes came out dissonant, crashing into each other like waves. Elena's heart tightened. Mia was fighting something, but it wasn't just the music, it was something deeper, something inside of her that she was afraid to let loose. Elena could see it, the way her fingers trembled, the strain in her shoulders, the way her eyes closed as if to block out the world. The moment hung heavy in the air. Elena's breath caught in her chest. This was no longer about the performance, it was about the person sitting at the piano. Elena knew she couldn't just stay hidden behind the curtains, watching in silence. The urge to reach out, to offer comfort, overwhelmed her. But she hesitated. Was it her place to intrude on Mia's private pain? As the final note faltered in the air, hanging unresolved, Elena could no longer stay passive. Her feet moved before her mind could catch up, carrying her forward until she was standing at the edge of the stage. Mia had her head down, her hands still trembling above the keys. The silence was deafening. Elena's voice broke through it, quiet but steady. "I've been listening," Elena said softly, her words catching in her throat. She didn't know exactly what she was doing, but it felt right. "I can hear it in your music. You don't have to hide behind it." Mia's head shot up in surprise, her eyes wide and startled. For a brief moment, there was a flash of fear in her gaze, as though she were about to retreat into herself again. But something in Elena's expression, something vulnerable, yet understanding, seemed to soften the tension in the air. Mia didn't speak at first, her lips parted as if she had no words to offer. Elena took a careful step closer, the distance between them now reduced to mere inches. "You don't have to be perfect for anyone, Mia," Elena continued, her voice gentle but firm. "I hear you. I hear the truth in your music, and that's enough. You're enough." The words hung in the air between them, a confession that neither of them had expected. Mia blinked, her eyes glistening with something Elena couldn't quite name. The weight of her emotions was evident now, there was no more hiding behind the facade of perfection. For the first time, Elena saw Mia as someone who wasn't just a talented pianist, but a person carrying her own silent burdens, someone who, like her, had been afraid to let anyone see the cracks. Mia's fingers rested on the piano keys, her body slightly slumped as if the invisible weight had finally been acknowledged. She let out a soft sigh, her lips trembling before she spoke. "I didn't think anyone noticed. I thought I was alone in this." Elena shook her head slowly, her heart swelling with an emotion she couldn't quite articulate. "You're not alone," she whispered. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Mia's gaze dropped to the keys, but there was a quiet peace in her expression now, something that hadn't been there before. Elena watched her, her own heart stirring with a sense of connection that she hadn't expected. It wasn't about fixing things, about making everything perfect, it was about acknowledging the imperfections, the rawness of their emotions, and accepting them. As Elena turned to leave, she knew that something had shifted, not just between them, but inside herself. She no longer felt like an outsider to Mia's world. Instead, she felt a quiet understanding, as if the music had brought them together in a way that words never could. And for the first time, Elena didn't feel the need to hide her own vulnerability. She was enough, just as she was. The following days passed with a quiet intensity. Elena found herself returning to the concert hall more and more, as if drawn by an invisible thread. She would watch Mia play from the shadows, noticing how her fingers would move across the piano keys with a grace that spoke of years of practice. Yet, there was a subtle difference now. Elena could sense that Mia's playing had shifted from being purely technical to something more heartfelt, more raw. Each note seemed to carry a story, a part of Mia that she had never fully allowed to surface before. Elena's gaze followed every movement, her own emotions stirring in response to the music. There was an unspoken connection that had grown between them, like two parallel lines that had almost met but never quite crossed. The more Elena listened, the more she understood, this wasn't just music to Mia. It was a release, an expression of something deeper than words could convey. Mia, though, seemed unaware of Elena's quiet presence. She had become more withdrawn in the days leading up to this moment, retreating inwardly even while the music poured out of her. Elena noticed the way Mia would sometimes pause mid-song, her fingers trembling for just a brief moment, as if struggling with something unspoken, something that weighed heavily on her heart. But the hesitation was always brief. Mia would regain control, her hands finding their rhythm again, but the briefest flicker of vulnerability never escaped Elena's attention. One evening, after a particularly difficult performance, Mia stood up from the piano, wiping her hands on her skirt, her shoulders slumped in exhaustion. She didn't look up, but Elena could see the tension in her posture, the weight of the invisible burden Mia carried. Elena waited in silence, leaning casually against the side of the stage, her eyes fixed on Mia as the younger woman made her way toward her. There was something in the air tonight, an energy between them that felt different, more charged. Elena's heart began to race, an unspoken question hanging in the space between them. When Mia finally looked up, their eyes met in a moment of quiet understanding. The usual mask of distance was gone. Instead, there was a rawness in Mia's gaze that Elena hadn't seen before, a reflection of the vulnerability that had been hidden for so long. "I've been running from it," Mia said, her voice low, almost apologetic, but with a quiet determination underneath. She shifted her weight, avoiding Elena's eyes for a moment as if struggling to find the right words. "From everything. From the music. From myself. I thought if I kept playing, I could outrun it." Elena's heart clenched as she listened, the weight of Mia's admission hitting her harder than she expected. She could see the walls Mia had built around herself, the fear of being seen fully, the fear of facing the truth behind her music. Elena took a step closer, her eyes soft with empathy. She wanted to reach out, but she held back, waiting for Mia to meet her halfway. "You don't have to run anymore," Elena said quietly, her voice steady and warm, wrapping around Mia like a blanket. "You don't have to do this alone." Mia's lips trembled as she looked up, a flicker of something, hope, maybe, shining through the uncertainty. There was a vulnerability in her gaze now, something Elena had been waiting for, though she wasn't sure how to take the next step. Her heart ached with the desire to offer more, to tell Mia that it was okay to let go, that the walls could come down. "I've always been afraid," Mia admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Afraid of what I might find if I let go. Afraid of who I might be if I stop hiding behind the music." Elena took a deep breath, stepping forward, her hand almost instinctively reaching out. It was a small gesture, but it felt like everything. She placed her hand gently on Mia's shoulder, a silent reassurance that she was there, that Mia wasn't alone in this. "You don't have to be afraid," Elena said, her words laced with certainty. "You are enough, just as you are. You don't need to hide anymore. Not from me. Not from yourself." The moment stretched between them, heavy with all the words left unsaid. Mia's eyes softened as she allowed herself to lean into Elena's touch, a tremor running through her. Elena could feel the weight of the past months, maybe even years, falling away from Mia, piece by piece, as she allowed herself to be seen. Mia swallowed, the tremor in her voice betraying her vulnerability. "Thank you," she whispered. "For seeing me. Really seeing me." Elena's chest tightened, a mixture of emotions swelling inside her. She didn't speak right away, there were no words that seemed big enough, profound enough, for this moment. Instead, she simply nodded, her fingers gently brushing a lock of hair from Mia's face. In that simple gesture, Elena conveyed everything she couldn't say, everything she felt. And for the first time in a long time, Mia allowed herself to breathe, to let go of the weight that had been suffocating her. The silence between them was no longer uncomfortable. Instead, it was filled with the promise of something more, a beginning, not an end. And in that quiet, vulnerable moment, Elena knew that something was shifting, not just between them, but within them both. Weeks had passed since the night when Elena and Mia had begun to understand each other, and both of them had changed in ways that neither could have anticipated. The shift was subtle at first. It was in the way Mia's music seemed to deepen, each note infused with more emotion, more confidence, as if she was starting to believe in the power of her own voice. Elena noticed the small changes. Mia no longer flinched when their eyes met, her hands didn't shake when she sat at the piano. The fear that once consumed her was slowly being replaced with something else, something Elena could only describe as strength. But it wasn't just Mia's playing that had changed. There was something more profound in the way she interacted with the world now. She had begun to open up, her voice no longer a whisper, but a clear, steady tone, one that matched the music she was learning to play with such passion. There was a fire inside her that had been dormant for so long, and it was finally coming to life. It was during one of their regular evening performances that Mia's transformation became undeniable. The piano echoed through the hall, its resonance carrying the weight of all the emotions Mia had been storing up for years. She played with such intensity that Elena, who had always been close to the stage, could feel the vibrations in her chest. Every note Mia struck seemed to pull at something deep inside Elena, a rawness that reminded her of her own long-buried fears and dreams. She had always admired Mia's talent, but tonight, she saw something deeper. She saw a woman who had fought her own demons and was beginning to win. When Mia finished the piece, the room was still. For a moment, there was only silence, thick with the unspoken connection between them. Mia stood, her breath heavy, her body trembling slightly as she turned to face the room. But there was no longer any trace of the girl who had once hidden behind her music. Mia's gaze was unwavering as it scanned the audience, seeking out the one person who had become her anchor in this sea of change. Elena watched from her place by the stage, her heart pounding. Their eyes met, and Elena could see it, the strength in Mia's expression. There was no longer any trace of the uncertainty that had once plagued her. The girl who had doubted herself, who had hidden her true feelings behind the protective shield of her piano, was gone. In her place stood a woman who had faced her fears and embraced them. Mia's steps toward Elena were slow, deliberate, but there was no hesitation. She crossed the stage with a calmness that was almost surreal, and when she stood in front of Elena, she didn't need to say anything. Her presence was enough. It was in the way her hand reached out to Elena, trembling only slightly, but still confident in its gesture. She took Elena's hand, holding it firmly, but with a tenderness that was reserved only for moments of deep connection. "I've stopped running," Mia said, her voice a soft but resolute whisper. The words hung between them, filled with the weight of all the things that Mia had been running from for so long, her fears, her doubts, and, perhaps most of all, her need to be seen. "I'm not afraid anymore. Not of you. Not of myself. Not of the future." Elena's breath caught in her throat as Mia spoke. It was a declaration, an admission of vulnerability, and yet there was something triumphant in it. Mia had faced the darkest parts of herself and had emerged stronger. The music, once her only means of communication, was no longer just an escape, it was a bridge, a way for her to connect with the world, and with Elena, in ways she had never dared to before. "I'm proud of you," Elena whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You've come so far, Mia. I've seen you grow. You've learned to trust in yourself." Mia's eyes shimmered, not with sadness, but with something deeper, an overwhelming sense of release. The tears that welled in her eyes were not the result of sorrow, but of a quiet, cathartic relief. She had stopped hiding, stopped pretending, and had finally allowed herself to be seen, to be loved for who she truly was. Mia nodded slowly, her lips curving into a soft smile. The smile was different now. It was not the timid, hesitant smile of someone who was unsure of their place in the world. It was the smile of someone who had finally found their footing. Someone who had come to understand that they were worthy of love, worthy of connection. "I'm not afraid to be me anymore," Mia said, her voice steady now, her hand still holding Elena's. "And I'm not afraid of you, either. I never should have been." The silence between them stretched out, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful, full of understanding, full of the unspoken bond that had been growing between them over the past few months. Elena's heart swelled as she realized the depth of Mia's transformation. This was no longer just a story of a young woman discovering her voice through music. It was the story of two people, one who had been lost and one who had been patient enough to wait, to guide her, and in doing so, had found a part of herself in the process. As they stood there, hands entwined, the world around them seemed to disappear. The concert hall, the audience, the life outside, they all faded into the background. There was only this moment, this connection, this understanding that spoke volumes without a single word being uttered. And in that quiet space, Elena knew this was just the beginning. Mia was no longer running from herself, from the past, or from her future. She had found her place in the world. And Elena? She had found something she hadn't even realized she had been searching for all along. Together, they stood, a moment of peace and quiet strength settling between them, and for the first time, both of them felt like they had finally come home. Elena played the final note like a whisper, and pulled her hands back slowly, as if afraid to let the moment end. The crowd didn't erupt at first. They sat in stunned silence, suspended between awe and disbelief. And then, from the very back, Julian stood. He walked slowly, as if the weight of his silence still clung to him. When he reached the stage, he knelt beside Elena and whispered so softly that only she could hear. "You reminded me who I used to be." And for the first time, Elena smiled, not a shy smile, but a full, unguarded one. Because for once, she wasn't just a shadow in the corner. She had become a spark. In a world obsessed with fame and polish, Elena Grace reminded us that the most powerful voices are often the quietest ones, waiting for just one chance to be heard. And that night, she didn't just win the competition. She changed lives.